Imagine there are 300 facts about the world that people have been gathering for thousands of years, but no one has ever told them as a single story, not as a lesson, not as a list, but as a peaceful journey from the birth of the world to the moment you're listening to this video right now. And if you like stories like this, ones you can just turn on and immerse yourself in, you can support this video by subscribing and liking it. This helps create even more of these calm, long episodes. And now, let's get started. When the earth was born, there was no silence. There was only fire. Imagine standing at the very beginning, not of human history, not of civilization, not even of life, but at the very beginning of everything. Before the first breath, before the first wave, before the first shadow fell across a stone, before there was anything soft or green or gentle in this world. There was only rock and heat and chaos. About 4.5 billion years ago, a cloud of gas and dust began to collapse in on itself, slowly at first, then faster, pulled together by gravity, spinning, heating, compressing. Particles collided with particles. Rocks collided with rocks. And over millions of years, something began to take shape in the darkness of space. A sphere, dense and burning and completely, utterly alone. That was us. That was Earth. Not as we know it. Not with its blue oceans and white clouds and quiet forests, but a beginning, nonetheless. A hot, volcanic, furious beginning. The surface of the early Earth was nothing like solid ground. It was molten. A planet-wide ocean of liquid rock, glowing orange and red in the dark of space, constantly churned by the heat radiating from within. There were no mountains yet, no valleys, no shores, just an endless, slowly cooling sea of magma, and above it, a sky full of poison. The early atmosphere was thick with hydrogen, methane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide. No oxygen, no breathable air, nothing that life, as we understand it, could survive. And yet, this was the cradle. Not long after Earth formed, in geological terms, at least, something extraordinary happened. A body roughly the size of Mars came hurtling out of the young solar system and struck the Earth in a collision so massive, so total, that the phrase collision barely does it justice. It was more like a merging, a catastrophe that reshaped everything. The impact threw an enormous cloud of debris into orbit. Over thousands of years, the debris slowly gathered itself together, held by gravity, pulled into a sphere, and there it hung, pale, quiet, close. The moon. We rarely think about the moon as a consequence of violence. We look at it on warm evenings and feel something soft and nostalgic. But it was born in fire, just like us. And its presence changed everything. The moon stabilized the tilt of the Earth's axis, which in turn stabilized the seasons. Without the moon, the climate would have been wildly unpredictable, lurching between extremes with no pattern, no rhythm. Life, as it eventually emerged, may never have had the stability it needed to take hold. The moon pulled the oceans into tides. And those tides, scientists now believe, may have played a crucial role in the chemistry that eventually led to life. The constant mixing of water, minerals, and organic molecules in tidal pools created conditions where complex molecules could form, dissolve, reform, and gradually, over vast, incomprehensible stretches of time, become something new. Water itself is one of the great mysteries of the early Earth. Where did it come from? The planet was so hot in its early stages that any water present during formation would have evaporated into space. And yet the oceans exist. They are ancient, older than most of the mountains, older than the continents as we know them. Scientists believe that much of Earth's water arrived from space, carried here by comets and asteroids that rained down on the young planet during a period called the Late Heavy Bombardment, a time when the inner solar system was being pelted by debris left over from the formation of the planets. Think about that for a moment. The water you drink, the oceans that cover 70% of this planet, the rain that falls on fields and forests in city streets. Much of it arrived here from the cold darkness of space, locked inside ancient rocks, hurtling through the void, delivered across hundreds of millions of years of cosmic traffic. Water is not just a feature of Earth. In many ways, water is Earth. It shapes the land, drives the weather, regulates the temperature, and makes life possible. And it has been here, in some form, for billions of years, patient and persistent, surviving every catastrophe, outlasting every era. Beneath your feet, right now, the earth is alive. Not metaphorically, literally. The interior of the planet is in constant, slow motion. Vast currents of semi-molten rock moving through the mantle, carrying heat from the core toward the surface. At the very center of the Earth, temperatures reach somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 degrees Celsius. That is comparable to the surface of the Sun. The core is made mostly of iron and nickel, and its inner portion is solid, squeezed into solidity not by cold, but by the extraordinary pressure of everything above it. This internal heat drives something called plate tectonics, the slow movement of the great rocky plates that make up the Earth's surface. These plates carry the continents on their backs, and they have been moving for billions of years. 250 million years ago, all the land on Earth was joined together in a single supercontinent that geologists call Pangaea. It was surrounded by one enormous ocean. There were no separate continents, no Atlantic, no separate Americas or Eurasia or Africa. Just one vast landmass, and around it, endless water. Then Pangaea began to break apart. The plates shifted. The continents drifted slowly, over hundreds of millions of years, to where they sit today. And they are still moving. Europe and North America are drifting apart by roughly the same rate that your fingernails grow, a few centimeters per year. The Himalayas, the tallest mountains on Earth, are still rising, still being pushed upward by the collision between the Indian subcontinent and the rest of Asia. The ground beneath us is not still. It never has been. Above us, something equally extraordinary was taking shape. The magnetic field of the Earth, generated by the movement of liquid iron in the outer core, extends far out into space, forming an invisible shield around the planet. This field deflects the solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles radiating outward from the sun. Without the magnetic field, the solar wind would strip away the atmosphere over geological time, just as it stripped away the atmosphere of Mars. Life on Earth exists, in part because the planet has a magnetic heart. that atmosphere itself is a miracle of gradual change. The early atmosphere was nothing like what we breathe today. It was transformed slowly and irreversibly by life itself, but that belongs to the next chapter. What matters here is that the atmosphere became a kind of blanket, trapping enough heat to keep liquid water on the surface, while also filtering out the most dangerous radiation from the sun. It is a precise, fragile balance. A little more greenhouse effect, and the oceans boil. A little less, and they freeze solid. For billions of years, this balance held. And beneath the surface of those ancient oceans, something was stirring. The deep ocean floor is perhaps the least explored place on Earth. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of the bottom of the sea. The deepest point, the Challenger, deep in the Mariana Trench, reaches nearly 11 kilometers below the surface. The pressure there is more than 1,000 times the pressure at sea level. It is cold, dark, and silent in a way that is almost impossible to imagine. But it is not lifeless. Even in those crushing depths, even without sunlight, life finds a way. Hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor release superheated water rich in minerals, and around these vents, ecosystems thrive. Bacteria, tube worms, shrimp, species that have never seen the sun and never will. These deep-sea ecosystems give scientists hope that life might exist elsewhere in the universe. Perhaps in the oceans beneath the ice of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, or Enceladus, circling Saturn. Life, it turns out, is not as fragile as it looks. Given the right chemistry and the source of energy, it finds a way. It always has. The world before humans was not empty. It was full of process and change and slow, grinding time. Mountains rose and were worn back down to sand. Oceans opened and closed. Continents drifted like slow ships across the surface of the planet. Ice ages came and went. Volcanoes reshaped coastlines. Asteroids fell from the sky. All of this happened without anyone watching, without anyone naming it, recording it, wondering about it. The Earth did not need an audience. It simply was. Patient, powerful, indifferent, and impossibly old. And then, after 4.5 billion years of all this, something new appeared. Something small and fragile and curious. Something that would look up at the sky and the mountains and the ocean and start asking why. But that is a story for later. For now, close your eyes. Feel the ground beneath you, ancient, still moving, alive with heat from a core as hot as the sun. You are resting on a planet that is 4.5 billion years old. And it was here, burning and patient, long before you arrived. At first, there was nothing alive. And then, quietly, without announcement, without drama, there was. No one saw it happen. There were no eyes yet to see, no ears to hear, no mind to understand what had just occurred in the warm, mineral-rich water of the ancient ocean. But somewhere, in some shallow pool or dark hydrothermal vent, a collection of molecules crossed a threshold that had never been crossed before. They began to do something remarkable. They began to copy themselves. Life did not begin with a roar. It began with chemistry. About 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, perhaps even earlier, the first self-replicating molecules appeared in the Earth's oceans. Scientists still debate exactly where and how it happened. Perhaps in hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, where heat and minerals created the perfect conditions for complex chemistry. Perhaps in shallow tidal pools, where water evaporated and concentrated organic molecules, then refilled, then evaporated again. A rhythm of concentration and dilution that may have encouraged the formation of the first primitive membranes. Whatever the location, the result was the same. Something small and molecular learned to make copies of itself. And in that single, silent moment, the entire future of the life on Earth was set in motion. These first living things were not cells as we understand them. They were simpler, almost unimaginably so. Just molecules with the ability to replicate, wrapped perhaps in a thin, fatty membrane to separate their chemistry so from the surrounding water. But they were alive, and they were hungry, and they were everywhere. For the first 2 billion years of life on Earth, this was all there was. Simple, single-celled organisms. No eyes, no limbs, no brains, no hearts. Just cells, dividing, consuming, surviving. The planet's oceans were full of them, invisible and ancient, doing what life does, persisting. And yet, even in that apparent simplicity, something astonishing was happening. These early microorganisms were already competing, already adapting, already in the blind and goalless process of evolution, beginning to find new ways to survive. Some developed the ability to break down certain minerals for energy. Others learned to consume each other. And then, roughly 2.5 billion years ago, some of them developed a new trick, one that would permanently, irreversibly change the planet. They learned to use sunlight. Photosynthesis is perhaps the most important biological innovation in the history of Earth. Before it, life was limited by chemistry, by the availability of certain minerals and organic molecules to consume. After it, life had access to an essentially limitless source of energy, the sun. These early photosynthetic organisms, ancient relatives of what we now call cyanobacteria, spread through the oceans in vast numbers, drinking in sunlight and exhaling something that had barely existed in the atmosphere before: oxygen. For millions of years, oxygen was a waste product, a byproduct of photosynthesis, released into an atmosphere that had no use for it. And at first, it was actually toxic to most life on Earth. The organisms that had evolved in an oxygen-free world were poisoned by this new gas accumulating in the atmosphere. It was, in geological terms, a catastrophe, an extinction event caused not by an asteroid or a volcano, but by the metabolic waste of tiny microbes. Scientists call it the Great Oxidation Event. But from catastrophe came opportunity. Some organisms evolved to tolerate oxygen, then to use it. Oxygen-based respiration turned out to be vastly more efficient than the earlier methods. It released far more energy from the same amount of food. Life that could breathe oxygen could be more active, more complex, more everything. The atmosphere was transformed, and slowly, over hundreds of millions of years, the stage was being set for something bigger. About 2 billion years ago, another revolution occurred. This one inside the cell itself. One microorganism swallowed another, but instead of digesting it, something unusual happened. The smaller organism survived inside the larger one, and together they worked better than either did alone. The inner organism became what we now call the mitochondria, the energy-producing engine inside almost every complex cell on Earth. This process, called endosymbiosis, gave rise to an entirely new kind of cell, larger, more complex, with a proper nucleus to hold its genetic information. From these new complex cells, eventually everything else would grow. Plants, fungi, animals. Every creature with more than one cell, every organism you can see with the naked eye, all of it traces back to that ancient accidental partnership between two microbes in a primordial sea. For a long time, even after complex cells appeared, life stayed in the ocean. The land was bare. No soil, not really, just rock, slowly being broken down by wind and water and the patient work of the earliest microbes. No plants, no insects, no sound except the wind and the waves. Then, around 500 million years ago, something triggered an explosion. The Cambrian explosion, one of the most dramatic events in the history of life, saw the sudden appearance of an enormous variety of animal body plans in a geologically short period of time. Eyes appeared, shells, legs, mouths designed not just to absorb nutrients, but to hunt and catch and eat. The ocean suddenly filled with creatures of startling complexity and variety, some familiar in outline, some so strange that they seem almost alien. Life had discovered form, and it would never go back. Plants made it to land first. Around 470 million years ago, simple plant-like organisms began colonizing the edges of the continents, slowly transforming bare rock into something new, something we would eventually call soil. They were followed by fungi, which formed partnerships with plant roots that persist to this day. Forests, when they eventually came, were not isolated collections of individual trees. They were networks, connected underground through fungal threads, sharing nutrients, sending chemical signals, responding to drought and disease in ways that look, from a distance, almost cooperative. Trees, it turns out, are not loners. The largest trees in a forest will channel sugars through fungal networks to smaller, younger trees growing in their shadow, trees that would otherwise starve for lack of sunlight. Whether this is altruism or simply the mathematics of a shared system, scientists still debate. But the connection is real. The forest thinks slowly, but it thinks together. Animals followed plants onto land. Insects came first, appearing around 400 million years ago, long before the dinosaurs, long before the first mammal drew breath. They were extraordinarily successful from the beginning and remain so today. Of all the animal species currently known to science, more than half are insects. They were the first creatures to achieve powered flight, roughly 350 million years ago, an innovation that would not be reinvented for another 300 million years, when birds took to the sky. Then came the great reptiles. The dinosaurs appeared roughly 230 million years ago, and for the next 165 million years, they dominated the land. To understand what 165 million years means, Modern humans have existed for perhaps 300,000 years. The dinosaurs ruled the earth for more than 500 times as long as we have been here. They were not a failed experiment. They were an extraordinary success, diverse and adaptable, ranging from creatures smaller than a chicken to the largest animals ever to walk on land. And then, around 66 million years ago, a rock fell from the sky. An asteroid, roughly 10 to 15 kilometers across, struck what is now the Gulf of Mexico, with a force billions of times greater than any nuclear weapon ever built. The impact triggered wildfires, earthquakes, tsunamis, and a cloud of debris that blocked the sun for years. Temperatures plummeted, plants died. The food chains that supported the giant dinosaurs collapsed. 75% of all species on Earth went extinct, but not everything died. Tucked beneath the debris, surviving on whatever scraps of food remained, small, warm-blooded creatures endured. Mammals had existed alongside the dinosaurs for millions of years. Small, largely nocturnal, keeping out of the way of the giants that ruled the world. They had fur to keep warm. They bore life young and cared for them. And when the sky cleared and the sun returned and the forest slowly began to grow again, they were still there, waiting. And now the world belonged to them. Evolution has no plan, no destination, no preference for complexity or intelligence or size. It is simply this: those who survive pass on their traits, those who don't disappear. Over millions of generations, tiny changes accumulate: a slightly better eye, a slightly stronger immune system, a slightly different beak. And eventually those tiny changes add up to something new. A new species, a new way of living. There is no progress in evolution, no ladder being climbed, just an endless, patient, blind process of variation and selection playing out across geological time. And yet, from that process, everything living on Earth today was made. Every flower and beetle and deep sea fish and redwood tree and polar bear. Every genome is a record of survival, a 4 billion year long story of what worked, written in the language of DNA. The world before humans was not quiet. It was dense with life, layered and ancient and intricately connected. Every creature was part of a web, consuming and being consumed, competing and cooperating, adapting and changing. The strongest did not always survive. The biggest did not always last. What lasted was whatever could adapt, whatever could find a new way to live when the old way no longer worked. That lesson is written in every fossil ever pulled from the ground. And somewhere in that long, patient story, something new was beginning to stir, something that would change the rules entirely. But not yet. For now, rest. The world took 4 billion years to build what you see around you. It can wait a little longer. For most of history, we were nothing special. Small, vulnerable, no claws worth mentioning, no venom, no armor, no particular speed. In a world full of creatures that had been perfecting their survival for hundreds of millions of years, the early human was, by most measures, unremarkable. We could not outrun a horse. We could not outfight a bear. We could not smell danger from a mile away or see in the dark or survive a winter without help. And yet, here we are. Modern humans appeared roughly 300,000 years ago in Africa. But the story begins earlier, much earlier, in the slow branching evolution of the primates. Millions of years before the first recognizably human creature walked upright across the savannah, our ancestors were already changing. Brains were growing, hands were becoming more precise, eyes shifted to the front of the face, giving depth perception, useful not for smelling out predators, but for judging distances, for reaching, for manipulating the world with intention. We were not the first of our kind. Other species of the genus Homo walked the earth before and alongside us. Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans. They made tools. They used fire. Some buried the dead. Some may have had language of a kind. The line between them and us is not as clean as we once thought. In fact, it is not a line at all. It is a blur. Modern humans interbred with Neanderthals. The evidence is written in our DNA. Most people alive today outside of Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal genetic material. We were not separate streams. We were tributaries that merged, mixed, and flowed forward together into the present. Fire changed everything. The control of fire, not just the opportunistic use of naturally occurring flames, but the ability to create fire deliberately, to carry it, to maintain it, is one of the most transformative developments in human history. Scientists debate exactly when this happened. Some evidence suggests controlled fire use as far back as 1,000,000 years ago. But by the time modern humans were spreading across the world, fire was already central to life. Fire meant warmth in cold climates, the ability to survive nights and winters that would otherwise kill. It meant light in the darkness, which extended the hours available for social activity, for conversation, for the slow accumulation of shared knowledge. It meant cooked food, which is more digestible than raw food, releasing more calories with less effort, effectively giving the human gut a break and redirecting energy to the most expensive organ in the body, the brain. Cooking, some researchers argue, is what allowed the human brain to grow so large. The caloric demands of a brain this size are extraordinary. It consumes roughly 20% of all the energy the body produces, despite accounting for only 2% of body weight. Without the caloric efficiency of cooked food, sustaining a brain this large may simply not have been possible. We are, in a very real sense, the species that fire built. But fire was only the beginning. Language was the true revolution. Every animal communicates. Bees dance to indicate the direction of flowers. Whales sing across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Wolves signal with posture and sound. But human language is something qualitatively different. Not just communication, but the ability to describe things that are not present, things that happened yesterday, things that might happen tomorrow, things that exist only in imagination. With language came the ability to teach without demonstration. A human child does not have to watch someone die from eating a poisonous plant to learn that the plant is dangerous. Someone can simply say, "Do not eat that." And the lesson, accumulated through painful experience, transfers instantly across generations. This is what anthropologists call cumulative culture, the ability to build knowledge across time, each generation starting not from scratch, but from where the last generation left off. Every other animal, no matter how intelligent, essentially begins again. A clever crow is born knowing nothing of what clever crows before it discovered. But a human child inherits thousands of years of accumulated understanding before it speaks its first word. We stand on a mountain of the dead, on everything everyone before us ever learned, preserved in language and story and eventually writing. That mountain is what we call civilization. For most of our existence, though, civilization was not yet built. For the vast majority of the 300,000 years of human history, people lived as hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, following animals, gathering plants, living in small groups. These were not primitive people in any meaningful sense. Their knowledge of the natural world was extraordinarily deep. They could read weather, track animals across hard ground, identify hundreds of plants by sight, navigate by stars. Their lives were difficult, but they were not empty. Then, roughly 12,000 years ago, something shifted. In several places around the world, independently, without contact with each other, people began to do something new. Instead of following animals, they began to keep them. Instead of gathering plants, they began to grow them. Agriculture was not a single invention. It was a gradual, tentative process of experimentation that unfolded across thousands of years in Mesopotamia, in China, in Mesoamerica, in sub-Saharan Africa. But its consequences were total. Farming produced surplus, more food than was needed to survive the immediate moment. Surplus allowed some people to stop farming and do other things, to make pottery, to build, to trade, to govern, to think. Settlements grew into villages, villages into towns, towns into the first cities. By around 3500 BCE, the city of Uruk in what is now Iraq had tens of thousands of inhabitants, a density of human beings that had never existed before, living together in organized complexity. And with cities came a problem. How do you keep track of everything? Writing was not invented for poetry. It was invented for counting. The earliest written records are not myths or prayers or literature. They are lists. Records of grain stored, livestock counted, debts owed. The first writers were not artists. They were administrators, scratching symbols into clay tablets to keep track of a world that had grown too complex to hold entirely in memory. But writing, once invented, became something more than bookkeeping. It became memory that outlasted the person who made it. It became the ability to send a thought across time, to speak to someone not yet born. Every book ever written is an act of extraordinary presumption. I have something worth saying, and I believe someone in the future will want to hear it. The first libraries were the first attempt to gather everything humanity knew into one place. They were also among the first things destroyed in war. The burning of the Library of Alexandria is mourned even now, not because we know exactly what was lost, but because we understand instinctively what it meant. Knowledge is fragile. It must be tended. Civilizations rose and fell. Empires built roads and aqueducts and legal systems, spread languages and religions across vast territories, connected distant peoples through trade and force. and then collapsed, worn down by overextension, climate shifts, disease, internal conflict, or the slow, patient pressure of other peoples pushing at their borders. History is not a story of steady progress. It is a story of cycles, of things built and destroyed and built again, each time slightly different, carrying forward some of what came before and losing some of it forever. War runs through all of it like a dark thread. Every major civilization has fought in territory, resources, religion, pride, fear. The reasons change, but the pattern holds. And yet alongside the wars still was the same civilizations were writing poetry, making music, raising children, falling in love, arguing about justice, building temples to gods they believed were watching. Human beings have always been both things at once, capable of tremendous cruelty, capable of tremendous tenderness. The remarkable thing is not that we build civilizations. The remarkable thing is what drove us to build them, something restless and unsatisfied at the center of human consciousness. A need not just to survive, but to understand, not just to eat, but to ask where the food came from, not just to watch the stars, but to name them, and then to wonder what they were made of, and then to build instruments to find out. No other animal looks at the night sky and feels the pull of that particular mystery. No other animal buries its dead and then asks, what comes next? We are the species that could not leave things unexplained, and it made us restless and difficult and sometimes dangerous, but it also made us everything we are. The world did not ask for a creature like us, but it got one, and nothing after that was ever quite the same. For most of human history, the horizon was the end of the world. Not metaphorically, literally. What lay beyond the mountains, beyond the ocean, beyond the desert, that was the unknown. That was the place of monsters and myths and stories told around fires to explain what no one had yet seen. Each village, each tribe, each city existed in its own universe, trading with neighbors, occasionally warring with them, but largely unaware that somewhere on the other side of an ocean, another civilization was building temples, writing laws, raising children under a different sky. The world was large then, enormously, overwhelmingly large, and then slowly it began to shrink. It started with curiosity and necessity and greed. Let us be honest about that too. The first great voyages were not made by dreamers staring romantically at the horizon. They were made by merchants calculating profit, by kings seeking resources, by navigators who had learned to read the stars well enough to trust the open sea. The Polynesians had been sailing across the vast Pacific for thousands of years, finding and settling islands separated by thousands of kilometers of open ocean, navigating by stars and wave patterns and the flight paths of birds in ways that still astonish modern scientists. The Chinese sent enormous fleets across the Indian Ocean in the early 15th century, ships larger than anything Europe would build for another century, carrying hundreds of sailors, explorers, diplomats, and traders. They reached the coast of Africa. They mapped coastlines. They made contact with dozens of civilizations. And then they stopped. Political winds shifted, the voyages were cancelled, the ships were left to rot. History is full of doors that were opened and then quietly closed again. Europe's turn came later, but when it came, it was total. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west from Spain, looking for a faster trade route to Asia, and found instead two continents that European maps had never imagined. The consequences of that moment and the decades of exploration that followed reshaped the entire world in ways that are still unfolding today. Within a generation, Spanish and Portuguese ships had mapped the coastlines of South America, rounded the tip of Africa, and established sea routes to India and the Far East. Magellan's expedition completed the first circumnavigation of the globe between 1519 and 1522. 3 years at sea, most of the original crew dead by the end, but the question answered definitively. The world was round, and it was connected, and you could sail all the way around it. The map of the world filled in with astonishing speed. Coastlines that had been blank became detailed. Interiors remained mysterious longer. Africa's interior, the heart of South America, the Arctic and Antarctic. But the outline of the planet, the shape of it, was now known. Humanity had found itself. Trade followed the ships, and trade changed everything. Goods that had once been unimaginably exotic became, over generations, ordinary. Spices from Southeast Asia, silk from China, cotton from India, sugar from the Caribbean, tobacco and cocoa and potatoes and tomatoes from the Americas. Foods that had never existed in European, African, or Asian diets, that now became staples without which entire cuisines are unimaginable. Italy without tomatoes, Ireland without the potato, Switzerland without chocolate. The exchange went both ways, but not equally. Europe brought to the Americas something far more devastating than any weapon: disease. Indigenous populations had no immunity to smallpox, measles, influenza, illnesses that were common and survivable in Europe, but catastrophic in the Americas. Estimates vary, but some historians believe that between 50 and 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas died in the century following European contact. Entire civilizations, their languages, their knowledge, their histories, vanished so completely that we will never fully know what was lost. The world was connecting. But connection, then as now, was not the same as equality. Then came the machines. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the late 18th century and spread across Europe and North America in the 19th, and it accelerated everything. Before it, the pace of change had been measured in generations. After it, change came faster than any single life could fully absorb. Steam engines replaced muscle. Factories replaced workshops. Cities exploded in size as people moved from the countryside seeking work, crowding into industrial towns that had neither the infrastructure nor the intention to care for them properly. Child labor, 16-hour workdays, rivers black with industrial waste. The cost of transformation was paid, as it usually is, by those with the least power to refuse. But alongside the suffering, something else was happening. Productivity increased on a scale never seen before. Goods became cheaper. Travel became faster. A journey that had taken weeks by horse now took days by train. Letters that had taken months to cross an ocean began to travel in weeks, then days. Then, with the invention of the telegraph, almost instantly. The world was not just connected now, it was accelerating. Electricity arrived and remade daily life so completely that it is almost impossible to imagine existence without it. Light after dark, refrigeration, communication across vast distances in real time. The telephone carried voices through wires, the radio carried them through air. And with each new technology, the sense of distance, the feeling of being far from other people, other places, other ideas, diminished a little more. Two world wars tore through the first half of the 20th century with a violence that the accelerating technologies of industry had made newly possible. Machines that had been built to connect the world were repurposed again and again to destroy it. The same railways that moved goods moved troops. The same chemistries that produced fertilizer produced poison gas. Progress, it turned out, was not inherently good. It was simply power, and power goes wherever it is directed. And then came the internet. In the last decades of the 20th century, something happened that no previous generation could have imagined. Not the explorers on the ships, not the engineers of the Industrial Revolution, not the telegraph operators tapping messages across continents. A network of computers, initially built for military communication, became accessible to ordinary people. And then it became everything. Information that had once required a library, a teacher, a journey, became available to anyone with a connection and a device. Ideas that would have taken years to spread from city to city now cross the entire planet in seconds. A video filmed on a phone in a small town in one country could be watched by millions of people in 100 countries before the end of the day. Distance, which had defined human experience since the beginning, effectively collapsed. And here is where it gets complicated, because connection is not the same as understanding. The world being smaller does not mean the world being simpler. If anything, the opposite is true. More information does not automatically produce more clarity. More voices do not automatically produce more wisdom. The same technology that allows a scientist in one country to share a discovery with a colleague on the other side of the world also allows a lie to travel faster than the truth and further. We built a world where everything is connected, where the price of coffee in your city is linked to rainfall patterns in Colombia, where a virus in one country becomes a global pandemic in weeks, where a decision made in a boardroom on one continent reshapes the lives of people on another who have never heard the company's name. The world is small now, but small is not the same as simple, and connected is not the same as understood. We built the roads, we laid the cables, we launched the satellites. We shrank the world down until it fit in the palm of a hand. And then we looked at what we had made, this strange, loud, luminous, tangled thing, and realized that the hardest journey was never across the ocean. It was across the distance between one human mind and another. That distance no ship has ever crossed. We live in the most informed moment in human history. Right now, at this exact second, more information exists than any human mind could process in 1,000 lifetimes. the sum of everything ever written, recorded, filmed, measured, and published sits accessible behind a screen that fits in your pocket. The answers to questions that would have consumed entire scholarly careers a century ago can be retrieved in seconds. Medical knowledge that would have seemed miraculous to a doctor in 1900 is now standard. We have mapped the human genome. We have photographed black holes. We have landed machines on Mars and listened to the wind there. By every measurable standard, we know more than we have ever known. And yet, something feels missing. The paradox of this age is not ignorance. It is the opposite. We are drowning in information and starving for meaning. Every morning brings a flood. News, notifications, opinions, data, updates, alerts. A river that never stops and never slows. The brain, which evolved over millions of years to process a relatively quiet world of immediate physical reality, is now asked to absorb the entire planet's worth of events before breakfast. Wars, elections, scientific discoveries, celebrity gossip, stock markets, natural disasters, all arriving simultaneously, all demanding the same urgent attention, all competing for the same finite resource. That resource is not intelligence. It is not time. Exactly. It is attention. And it has become the most valuable thing in the world. Attention is what companies sell advertising against. It is what social media platforms are engineered to capture and hold for as long as possible. The infinite scroll, the autoplay video, the notification that arrives at precisely the moment your focus was beginning to drift. None of this is accidental. It is the product of enormous investment, sophisticated algorithms, and a very clear understanding of how human psychology works. Your attention is being harvested continuously, and you're rarely paid for it. This is new, entirely new in human history. Every previous era had its distractions, gossip, spectacle, entertainment. But the scale is incomparable. A person living in medieval Europe might encounter, in an entire lifetime, fewer pieces of information than a person today encounters in a single morning. The brain has not changed to accommodate this. Evolution works across thousands of generations, not decades. We are ancient creatures living in a world that was built last Tuesday. And it shows. Science has never been more powerful and more misunderstood. The scientific method, that slow, careful, so self-correcting process of forming hypotheses, testing them, publishing results, inviting challenge, revising conclusions, has produced the most reliable knowledge humans have ever possessed. Vaccines, antibiotics, the understanding of DNA, climate modeling, quantum physics, neuroscience. Each of these represents not just a discovery, but an entire architecture of verified, tested, accumulated understanding. And yet, a significant portion of the world's population does not trust it. This is not simply stupidity. It is something more complicated. Science communicates in uncertainty, in probabilities and confidence intervals and peer review, while misinformation communicates in certainty, in simplicity, in the emotionally satisfying language of conspiracy and hidden truth. The human brain evolved to detect patterns and identify threats, finds certainty more comfortable than nuance. A confident lie travels faster than a careful truth. This is not a new observation. It is simply a very old problem wearing new technology. Meanwhile, the planet itself is changing. Human activity has warmed the Earth's atmosphere by roughly 1.2 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial period. That number sounds small. It is not small. The difference in global average temperature between the last ice age, when ice sheets covered much of North America and Europe, and the world we inhabit today is only about 5 to 6 degrees. A single degree of warming, distributed across the entire planetary system, moves enormous amounts of energy. It intensifies storms. It shifts rainfall patterns. It raises sea levels. It bleaches coral reefs and disrupts ecosystems that took millions of years to stabilize. This is perhaps the clearest illustration of the central tension of our age. We know what is happening. The science is not seriously contested among people who study it. We have the measurements, the models, the historical data, the physical understanding of why greenhouse gases trap heat. The knowledge exists in full. What is missing is not information. What is missing is the will, collective, political, cultural, to act on what we know. Technology, which promised to solve so many problems, has introduced new ones with equal efficiency. Artificial intelligence is rewriting what it means to work, to create, to communicate. Automation is transforming economies faster than education systems can adapt. The gap between those who understand the new tools and those who do not, between those who own the infrastructure of the digital world and those who simply use it, grows wider every year. And yet none of this is unprecedented in kind, only in scale. Every major technological revolution in history produced disruption before it produced stability. The printing press unleashed a century of religious wars before it produced the Enlightenment. The Industrial Revolution created miserable cities before it created the middle class. The pattern repeats. Technology arrives. It destabilizes. It eventually finds its place in a new equilibrium that no one predicted and everyone is surprised by. The question is not whether we will adapt. We will. We always have. The question is what the adaptation costs and who pays for it. And underneath all of it, underneath the data and the noise, and the accelerating change, human beings remain stubbornly, beautifully themselves. People still fall in love in complicated and inconvenient ways. They still grieve longer than anyone tells them they should. They still find disproportionate joy in small things. A meal that tastes exactly right. A song that arrives at the perfect moment. A conversation that runs 3 hours longer than intended because neither person wants it to end. They still tell stories to their children at night, in the dark, for the same reason humans have always told stories. Because the dark is large and stories make it smaller. Happiness, it turns out, has never been strongly correlated with material progress. Beyond a certain baseline of security and comfort, more wealth does not produce more well-being. The research is consistent and somewhat humbling. What makes people genuinely, sustainably happy is connection to other people, to meaningful work, to a sense of purpose that extends beyond the self. The things that mattered to a person sitting around a fire 50,000 years ago are not so different from the things that matter now. We have built rockets. We have not outgrown the need to belong. The oldest question in human history is still the one we have not answered. Why are we here? Not in the scientific sense. We understand the mechanics of how life arose and how consciousness emerged and how the brain produces the experience of being a self in a world. But in the deeper sense, the sense that arrives in the quiet after midnight, or at the edge of the ocean, or in the moment after something beautiful ends and you realize you will never have that exact moment again. What is this for? No civilization has definitively answered it. No technology will. It is perhaps the question we are meant to keep asking, because the asking itself is what keeps us curious and humble and human. 300 facts about the world cannot capture the world. The world is larger than any list, older than any story, stranger than any explanation. Every answer opens 3 new questions. Every map has an edge. Every era believes it stands at the end of history and turns out to be only the middle. You are alive at an extraordinary moment, not a perfect one, not an easy one, but one full of information and possibility, and the ancient, undiminished human capacity to look at what exists and imagine what might be better. That capacity is not nothing. It is perhaps everything. If this journey through the story of the world resonated with you, if something in these pages made you pause or wonder or see something familiar in a slightly different light, then consider sharing it with someone who might feel the same. And if you found value in what you heard tonight, a like means more than you might think. It tells us that this kind of storytelling is worth continuing, and we very much intend to continue. Sleep well. The world will still be here in the morning. It has been here for 4.5 billion years. It can wait.